Good morning, everyone. It's Daphne from Scrap and Create, and we are working on Cosmos mini album, and we are on page 4 and 5. These are going to be mirror images, and I've got them laid out here. We're going to start with left and right flaps for both page 4 and page 5, and then inside we're going to put a pocket, and I'm going to show you guys how to make a pocket that will fit inside your flaps, and I'll show you that after we get these put in. And these are just going to go to the left and right of your pocket page. Right now we're on page 4. And I woke up a little bit groggy this morning, so my voice is a little gravelly. Sorry about that. Yesterday was the 29th, July 29th. And it was my 20-year anniversary. So I spent the day with my husband down on the water. And I think sometimes when I do that, the next day that salt water gets to me and I have a little bit of a gravelly voice. So there we go. We had a great time. Okay, so that's in. We're going to do the same thing on page 5. But before we do, we're going to make a pocket that goes in here. And that pocket is going to be, let's see, what are we going to make this? I'm going to make it 4 inches by 9 inches. That's what we're going to start with, 4 by 9. Okay, so that's 4 by 11, 4 by 9. So as you all know, you need to score 3 sides to make a pocket. But we're going to stop after we score 2 sides, and I will show you why as soon as we score these 2. So we're going to score 1 side, rotate it, and then score the bottom. Okay. Now normally, if I was making a pocket that I wanted to go across to my 8-inch page, I would fold this score line in and then score at 8. Instead of scoring at a 1/2 inch and 8.5, I would score this, tuck it under because the score line does consume a little bit of paper, scoot it over, and then score at 8. But I'm not going to do that right now. And the reason is we're going to lay it in between these 2 flaps, and these 2 flaps are taking up a little bit of the width of the 8-inch page. So now that I've got my side scored, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it inside my 2 flaps, and I'm going to use my pencil to mark where the second score line is going to be. And it's going to be just something less than 8 because of these 2 flaps and hinges. So now I'm going to lay it in my scoreboard and score on the tick mark. And that way, and if you could see, it's a 1/16 inch off. If I had done it right at 8, this is a 1/16 inch less than 8. If I had done it right at 8, the 2 outside flaps would not want to come together. So the other way to deal with that is to add a second score line on your large flap, so you have a little gusset along each side. Here we go. Sorry, I was stalling because I mislaid my score. So I am not pushing it all the way against. I'm actually taking this tick mark and lining it up to the closest score line and pulling down. Okay, now that's done. Now we can miter the edges. We're going to do the same thing on page 5. And get some tape on it and lay it down. And hopefully you guys will see that this makes it fit nice and snugly, but it allows the doors to close. But we will find out in just a second. Sometimes this is trial and error, but I think we did all right. For page 5, I'll just do this off camera since we've gone through the detailed steps here. Okay, now let's lay it in. And see, it closes completely. Now, again, if I had put it right exactly at 8, it would not have closed. There would have been a little bit of a gap. The two flaps would want to billow out slightly on the edge. So you can do one of two things. Do what I just did, or you can make these flaps let me think, an 1/8 inch wider. So put 2 score lines. Instead of making it 4.5, make it 4 5/8. Put 1 score line and then put the second score line in. And that will make it come up and around like that. So that's just 2 options for you guys. This is the one I like, but it is up to you. Okay, and after we get this in, we're gonna locate some magnets. So one of the things I've learned from experience is when you're placing magnets on top of, or if you've got something that you want to close on top of a pocket, I'm going to concentrate for just a second, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. If you have something that you want to close on top of a pocket, don't put your magnet here. Put it on top of the pocket. And the reason is, once you stick a whole bunch of stuff inside your pocket, you're putting layers and layers between it and the magnets that you want to hold everything closed. So keep that in mind when you're doing a pocket. If at all possible, place the magnet on the pocket and to the flap so that you don't have to worry about everything that's, the idea is you're going to fill that pocket. And then you're going to put layers between the 2 magnets, and it won't want to hold after 2 or 3 items are placed in the pocket. I'm still having my morning coffee, which is delicious. So that is basically the design for page 4 and 5. So let's go ahead and set this aside and pull in sorry, I shuffled everything and lost it. Okay, page 5. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to make sure that our pocket openings are to the left and right, and then we're going to add our flaps. And it's difficult to see, I know, black on black, but what I do is I typically lay down one corner and I use that as a pivot point until I'm happy with the placement of the paper. When I'm adding my second flap, I like to take a really close look at how they're lining up and meeting in the middle of the page and actually back this one off based on that. The way your eyes are drawn, especially on page 5, this is going to be the spine, this is going to be the outside. It's more important for these 2 pieces of paper to line up than it is for the edge to line up. Your eye is going to be drawn to the center of the page. That's just a natural reaction to opening the book and seeing a page. So I spend more time lining up these 2 pages to meet perfectly than having it be perfect on the edge and then not perfect in the center. So that's something to consider. Now, a way around that is to make one of the flaps slightly larger than the other and have it overlap by plan. I didn't do that, and I rarely do, but it is a technique that I've used before, and that way your center line will look perfect. You don't have to worry about them meeting. It can overlap. So it's just a different design aesthetic, something to think about. Okay, now this one I'm going to do a little different. I'm still going to use the corner to pivot, but I'm going to start by pushing it against the edge of the existing flap, and then I'm going to come across and lay one corner down. Make sure I'm happy with it, and then get out of my own way and lay the rest of it down. There we go. It shifted ever so slightly, but it's pretty insignificant. You can see there's just a tiny little gap there and no gap down here, but to me it's not significant enough to shift it over. So I'm going to move forward with what I have. Okay, so the next step is we're going to make that 4 by 9 inch pocket, and I'm going to do that offline and be right back. Okay, I went offline, and part of the reason I do that is fiddling around with, oh, you know what I just realized is I gotta make sure I gave you the right measurements. 4.5, yeah. This should be 4 by 9, and I made this one 4.5 by 9, but that's an easy problem to solve. All I have to do is cut a 1/2 inch off the top, right? Let me double check. Yeah. I made it a little bit too big. Anyways, the reason I go offline to do some of this stuff is because I'm using my trimmer, which is loud, but also I'm pulling my scoreboard in and out, and it also makes a lot of racket, and sometimes I shake my desk, and that doesn't make for a very nice visual. Anyways, we did it once. This is the second one, so I'm going to take my tape off, and we're going to adhere it. We're on page 5, and then we're going to start decorating. And I believe I've got everything trimmed and inked. I know I have it trimmed. Sometimes I come across it and I realize I skipped an edge. So I'll talk a little bit about what I'm using. I'm using 3/8 inch tape, which is available in our shop. And that's my go-to size because it fits all the hinges that I do, because I do 1/2 inch hinges. If you do 1 inch hinges, you'll probably want 5/8 inch tape. But I use 1/2 inch, and I have found that that's been sufficient for everything. I've never had an issue with there not being enough grab. So 3/8 is what I use, and I do 1/2 inch hinges, and that goes for any of my interactive, sorry, that grabbed before I was ready, any of my interactive components, and also that's what I use on my hidden hinge. Sorry about that. So it grabbed before I wanted it to, and what I want to point out is when I lifted it, instead of trying to lift it straight up, if you do that, it's going to tear. If you tug at an angle, if you pull at an angle, say 30-degree angle off the paper, so pulling away and up at the same time, you can lift it right away if you haven't burnished your tape into place. Now, the other way you can remove it is using a product called Undo, which I highly recommend. That has saved a mini album or two for me. There's nothing worse than getting 90% done, making a mistake. You don't want to throw it away, so Undo is your solution. So now I'm going to try to focus and make sure I don't make that mistake again. Now, another way to avoid what I had just done, aside from paying attention to what you're doing, is don't remove all the tape until you're ready to commit. Just start by taking a corner off and then pulling it out like a zipper. Somehow I got away from that technique, but it works very well. Okay, so there we go. So now this is page 4 and 5, side by side. And I'm gonna start by decorating, actually I'm gonna do it backwards. I'm gonna start by decorating page 5. Page 5, I've started with a 12 by 12 from the collection. And if I haven't mentioned it already, I used everything for this album. I used 12 by 12, A4, and the 6 by 6. So there's a real variation of products that I decided to use. And when I say 12 by 12, I use the pattern collection and the the collection pack, the patterns pack. So that's 2 12 by 12s. One of them has 12, one of them has 8. The A4 and the 6 by 6. So I used one of each, and that'll be detailed in the description. And this, what I'm showing you right now, is a piece cut from the 12 by 12 collection pack. And I'll try to point that out as I go, but even I'm getting mixed up on the patterns, because once I take them out of the pack, they all start to look the same to me. But these very bold patterns with a big, a large detail or a large image, those are definitely coming from the 12 by 12 collection pack. Now, having said all that, it really doesn't matter how you mix these papers, because it goes together no matter what you're doing. That's one of the things that's kind of fun about it, but I'm going to get a contrast sheet so you guys can see what I'm doing on the edge. So you really can't go, there's really no two pages that don't work together, which can you know, significantly speed up your process because you're not so worried about, you know, matching your first 4 pages and then getting to your last 4 and going, oh, the paper I have left doesn't really go together. All the papers go together, and it doesn't really matter which ones you put together. I've tried it a couple of different ways looking at it, and it just looks good every way I tried. So it's kind of idiot proof. I was telling Julia, I'm like, oh my gosh, this album's making itself because everything matches so well. And it's true. It's true. So this came from a 12 by 12. I trimmed it down to 8 by 8, and then I split it in half, and then I trimmed it down again to make sure it fits on these panels. So it's just a little bit smaller. So each one of these panels is 4 inches. So the designer paper that's sitting on top of it is 3 7/8 by 7 7/8. So it's just a little bit smaller. But I started with a 12 by 12 and split it in half. Now, if you're going to do what I did, once you split it in half, all the trimming needs to come from the outside edges, or your pattern will have a hiccup in the middle. So if you trim it 8 by 8, split it in half, when you go to trim it down a little bit to go on the 4 by 8 panel, trim from the outside edges, not from the inside. And it depends on how strong the pattern is. If it's not a very strong pattern, it won't matter. But if it's a very strong pattern that you're using, it'll become obvious that there was a slice missing from the center. Okay, now before I go any further, we're going to stop so I don't forget to put magnets in. I get so excited about the designer paper, sometimes I forget. This is a good design also if you want to adhere ribbon and tie it across the center. And if I did that, my ribbon would be tucked under this side and pull across the center and tie. I'm just not a big fan of ribbon. Part of the reason is when you have ribbon, you're restricted to what you can put on top of it. Otherwise, you have a bow across the center of it. When you have a magnet, it is completely hidden, so you can actually put a photo on top of it if you want. I don't usually, but you can. Okay, now as I told you before, the idea of a pocket is to cram it full of goodies. So we don't want to place our magnet up here because once we fill our pocket, it'll make it hard for these to adhere. So we're going to place our magnets down here below the pocket line, and we want to choose a location so that it's far enough away from the edge that when we put our designer paper down, it's not exposed. Okay, I am going to get some large fat tape. So somebody had asked, how do we smooth over the magnet and keep it from being bulky? Well, that's kind of a challenge for everybody that uses magnets, but one of the things I do is I cover it with tape, and that tape will smooth the edges down. It doesn't make it thinner, but it will smooth the edges into the rest of the panel instead of it just having this circle. So that's one of the reasons why I place tape over it. One, it makes it more secure, and the other reason is it softens the edge of the magnet itself. So I think that's where I want it. I also want to make sure it's far enough away from this edge that when I put my paper on top of here, it's not exposed, and this looks pretty good. So let's try and see. Now if there's going to be a magnet on each side, now this tape I want to go vertical because of the orientation of this flap. And yes, so I'm far enough away from the edge that when I put my designer paper on, it'll be covered, okay? All right, so we got to do that 3 more times between the 2 pages. We'll just focus on the page we're on right now, which happens to be page 5. I just decided to decorate it first. And I'm going to try to eyeball. I need that contrast to see the edge of my pocket. going to be fine. There we go. Okay, so those are all in. So now we've got our A side done, and then the main part of, I wish I could tell you for sure, but the main part is going to have this design, and I'm not sure if this is from the 12 by 12 patterns or the 12 by 12 collection pack, honestly, but it is a smaller pattern. And again, it's one of those where I trimmed it down to roughly 8 by 8, and then I sized it down to fit so that 7 7/8 wide, and then I cut it so that I've got a pocket piece, and then I've got a piece that fits just above it, so it's a continuous pattern. It'll have a small stripe in between. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so the top one is going to slip ever so slightly into the pocket itself and then be backed off until we have a good border. Okay, so it's just barely going to fit into the pocket. And the way that that worked out is once I trimmed this down and I knew I was going to cut off a piece for my pocket, I made sure that the piece I cut off wasn't 3.5 inches, which is what this is. I made sure it was 3 3/8. So that gives me an 1/8 inch extra on the top side to fit slightly into the pocket. One, I like that look, but two, if your designer paper is slightly in the pocket, nothing will get hung up on the hinges that are holding it in place when you go to put something in your pocket. So that's the other reason I like to have a little bit of it go into the pocket. Okay, so another technique that I've used for covering and inserting designer paper into the pocket is to leave the very bottom without glue. Why would you do that? Well, if you overstuff it and you need to back it out, you don't want to leave a trail of glue. And also, if it's slightly inside the pocket, nothing's going to peel it up. So leave that leading edge unglued, and right now I'd say I have a little over 1/2 inch. Then you start by tucking it into the pocket and then backing it up to where you want to go. Now, if it had glue on it right now, if I overstuffed it and tried to back it out, it would just leave a trail of glue and potentially glue my pocket closed. So that's why I do it this way. And it has worked out wonderfully for me. A little bit of glue on my hands. Okay, now we're gonna burnish that into place. Okay, perfect. Okay, now we're gonna work on this. And you can see it's a continuous pattern. And I need my pick tool, and I don't see what I did with it. Here it is. I put it up. Okay, I'm going to add a little glue to the tape. One, it keeps it from grabbing my designer paper before I'm ready, but also if it does, I've got a little bit of time to maneuver. This art glitter glue dries really fast on paper, but you do have a little bit more time when it's either on plastic, metal, or tape, because the tape is not thirsty, it's not drinking the glue up, so it'll give me a little bit of wiggle time that I wouldn't get with paper on paper. So I got a little too much glue on the edge here. So I'm gonna try to be careful not to squeeze it all out. Isn't that beautiful? And I don't have anything to put in my pocket yet, but I fully intend to do that. Okay. Okay, so that is page 5. We still need to work on the inside or the B sides of these flaps, but I am going to take a break for now, and when I come back, we'll work on those. Hey everyone, it's Daphne from Scrap and Create. We're on to page 4. We're designing page 4. So I took a break and made sure everything was trimmed out and we're ready to go. So we have not placed our magnets, which is okay. We can go ahead and put our designer paper on now. I'm actually going to pull page 5 in and see how I want to arrange these. Which way do I like better? This way or this way? I like this way. Now the reason I'm doing flipping back and forth is these are not part of one piece that was split in half. These are just 2 pieces of designer paper that were trimmed off the edge of another sheet. And I honestly believe this is from the A4 pack and this is trimmed off from this sheet, from one of the sides of this sheet, but I'm actually not positive. So anyways, they don't marry together. So really what I'm looking for is flow across page 4 to 5. And this is what I like. And part of that is because these images sort of create this peak in the middle of the page. And that's why I chose this orientation. But it's really about what's pleasing to you. And you want to, if you've got pictures that you've already got set aside for your album, you'll want to take that into consideration too. You know, how I place the images will change how I might want to add a photo. And for me, when I'm putting the albums together, the way I think of it oftentimes, not all the time, but most of the time, is whatever's on the cover is really for just an aesthetic, and then all the goodies, all the photos and the journaling happen on the inside. But it's still okay or easy to put a little title or a small photo, say, of the event, and then have all the details on the inside of the spread. So that's kind of how I think about it. Others I've seen design it where the cover is sort of the headliner and the focus of the photos, and then some of the journaling and ephemera from any of the events go more on the inside. So it's just a different way of thinking about it, and I like both. Okay, so our A side's in. Let's open it up, and then let's get our magnets placed. So we're going to need 2 sets. And as before, we're going to try to stay away from the edge of the pocket so that we can get our designer paper to lay down completely over the magnet. I think that's good. That actually could have gone over a little further, but I'm not going to move it because it will work. What the heck? Sorry. Not now. Okay, sorry about that. Something happened and I got a phone call or something that interrupted the recording, and I just had to stop and make sure everything was still working. Anyway, we got 1 set of magnets in. Now we need to focus on this side. And I think that'll work. Yeah. Oops, dropped it. Okay, let's get those both down. Okay, now let's go ahead and lay in the centerpiece, which is going to go on the base of the page. Okay, now I can tell from the back side of this and the scale of this pattern that this definitely came from the 12 by 12 collection pack. And I did the same thing I did on page 5, where I rough trimmed out an 8 by 8, split it in half, and then trimmed it to fit. So let's go ahead and get this in. And I'm just dry fitting real quick to make sure everything's looking good. It is. And everything is inked. But we should take off the backing. So I'm just using my pick tool to burnish it into place real quick. You can use your bone folder. This pick tool is available in our shop. It is a tool from Silhouette. Yeah, I was just looking at the pattern orientation. That came with my Cameo cut machine, and I love it. I use it for removing tape all the time. It's actually called a weeding tool, to pick your trimmed pages off the adhesive sheet that you run through your machine. So Silhouette, Cricut, all those companies have something similar. Okay, we're going to do the same thing with this. We're going to put glue on the top, and we're going to leave the leading edge without glue for about 1/2 inch. That way we can slip it in the pocket and then back it off as required to get that nice frame. And I left about probably a little over 1/4 inch. But again, like I said, because it's actually in the pocket, it's not going to lift. Having trouble getting it in on one side. There we go. And now I'm going to push it into place. I've got glue all over me in the process. There we go. All right. Now don't be alarmed if your designer paper doesn't fit inside your pocket, because of the way we designed the pocket. We scored it, then put a little pencil mark, and then scored it again. It's potential that the pocket could be a little bit narrower than the paper that you trimmed out. That's okay, just take a slice off until you can get it to fit in the pocket. Okay. So we have our A and our main base page designer paper laid in. And our magnets. Now I gotta go trim out and ink our B-sides. I'll be right back. Oh my gosh. Hey guys, it's Daphne from Scrap and Create, and I'm bummed out. I just finished doing the B-side of page 4 and 5, and I got up to say goodbye to you guys and encourage you to like, share, and subscribe, and realized I had not hit the record button. So you did not get to see me do the B-side, but I'm going to show you what I did. These two were trimmed out from the 12 by 12 collection, and I just lined the inside, the B-side. So sorry about that. You didn't miss a whole lot. I just glued them down. They were trimmed and inked to fit. This is page 5, and these are scraps that were left from some of the 12 by 12s that I had trimmed out. So this came from the 12 by 12 collection pack as well. Either the patterns and solids or the patterns, I guess they don't call them patterns and solids, or the 12 by 12 collection pack, and honestly I can't tell the difference. I can pick out the 6x6 just because of the scale, and I can pick out the A4 because on the flip side of every single A4 is a cut apart. So it's very easy for me to tell those apart. The collection packs, once I took them out of the pad, it was really hard for me, well, not hard, impossible for me to keep track. But I did use a 12 by 12 collection pack and a 12, which has 12 patterns in it, and a 12 by 12 pattern pack, which has 8 sheets in it. So I used one of each plus an A4 and a 6x6. So I tried to point out as I was going through the build where I was using things, but like I said, those two were very hard to tell apart. And because I pre-cut before I sit down to work on the album, just because it's really a huge time saver, and I think it's kind of boring to sit and wait for somebody to trim out paper when you're watching a tutorial, I don't have 2 separate stacks of paper that I'm working with. So again, I apologize for not hitting the record to do the B-side of this, but there it is. It's beautiful, isn't it? I just love this paper. Okay, so that's it for page 4 and 5. And what I was going to say before is please take a minute to share, subscribe, and like our tutorials. Those likes go a long way to moving us up in the recommendations for YouTube so that other like-minded crafters can see our tutorials or be recommended our tutorials in the future. Thanks again for tuning in. This is Daphne from Scrap and Create.